The loan officer turned her computer screen toward me and said 4 words that made my stomach drop. "Your credit score is 400. I was 24 years old, had never owned a credit card, never missed a payment on anything, and somehow I had a credit score that was basically non-existent. Then she showed me the accounts, 17 of them. All opened when I was a child. All in collections. All connected to my mother's address. That's when I realized my own mother had been stealing my identity since I was 6 years old. My name is Maya Chen. And this is the story of how I had to file a police report against my own mother just to have a chance at a normal life. This is the story of how the person who was supposed to protect me became the person I needed protection from. I've been saving for a house for 3 years. Every single paycheck from my job as a dental hygienist, I'd put away as much as I could. I lived in a tiny studio apartment that smelled like the Thai restaurant downstairs. I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it and a passenger window that wouldn't roll down. I meal prepped every Sunday to save money on food, eating the same chicken and rice for 6 days straight. I never went out with friends because drinks cost money. I didn't buy new clothes unless something literally fell apart. Every dollar I could scrape together went into my savings account. By the time I was 24, I had $30,000 saved for a down payment. I was so proud of myself. I'd look at that number in my bank account and feel this overwhelming sense of accomplishment. I'd done it. I'd saved enough to buy a house. I thought I'd done everything right. I found a house through a real estate agent I'd connected with online. It was a cute 2-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from the dental office where I worked. The house was listed at $220,000, which was at the top of my budget but manageable. It had a small backyard, updated kitchen, new roof. It was perfect for me. Maybe I could even rent out the second bedroom to help with the mortgage payments. The sellers accepted my offer within 24 hours. I was over the moon. I called my mom immediately to tell her the good news. She lived about an hour away in a different city, and we talked maybe once a week. She seemed happy for me when I told her. Said she always knew I'd do well for myself. That I'd always been responsible with money. That conversation plays on repeat in my head now. The way she said I was responsible with money. Knowing what she'd done. The pre-approval process should have been simple. I had a stable job making about $60,000 a year. I had that $30,000 down payment. I had no debt that I knew of. My loan officer, a woman named Sandra who wore too much perfume and had photos of her golden retrievers all over her desk, said the pre-approval would be a formality. She told me to expect good news within 48 hours. Instead, she called me the next day and asked if I could come into the office to discuss my application in person. The tone of her voice made my heart sink. It was that careful, overly professional tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. I asked if there was a problem. She said we just needed to discuss some things face to face. I took a half day off work and drove to her office, my stomach in knots the entire time. I kept trying to figure out what could be wrong. Maybe my job history wasn't stable enough? Maybe I hadn't been at my current position long enough? I'd been there 3 years, but maybe that wasn't enough for a mortgage lender. When I got to Sandra's office, she had this uncomfortable expression on her face, like she was about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. She asked me to sit down and then turned her computer monitor toward me. That's when I saw it. Credit score, 402. I stared at those numbers, not understanding what I was looking at. I'd checked my credit score about a year ago on one of those free websites, Credit Karma or something like that, and it had said I had insufficient credit history. Not bad credit, just no credit. Which made sense because I'd never had a credit card or a loan. I was careful with money, always paid cash, avoided debt. That's how my mom had raised me. Ironically enough, Sandra was talking, her voice gentle but firm. She was explaining that, with a credit score in the 400s, no lender would approve me for a mortgage. That kind of score indicated serious credit problems, multiple missed payments, accounts and collections. She started scrolling through my credit report, and that's when my confusion turned to horror. There were accounts everywhere. Credit cards from companies I'd never heard of. A utility bill from an address I didn't recognize. A car loan for a vehicle I'd never owned. A personal loan from a payday lender. Another credit card. Another utility bill. On and on and on. 17 accounts total. Most of them in collections, showing months or years of missed payments. Total debt, $63,000. I told Sandra there had to be a mistake. The words came out shaky and panicked. I'd never opened a credit card in my life. I'd never taken out a car loan. I didn't even know what half these companies were. There was no way any of this could be mine. Sandra's expression shifted to something like sympathy. She asked me if anyone could have had access to my social security number. Parents, siblings, former partners. I told her just my parents, but that didn't make sense because neither of them would do something like this. My dad lived in Arizona, and I barely talked to him. And my mom, well, she'd always taught me to be careful with money and credit. She wouldn't steal my identity. Even as I said it, something nagged at the back of my mind. Sandra suggested I pull my full credit reports from all three bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, and go through every single account. She said I should dispute any accounts I didn't recognize. And if it turned out to be fraud, I'd need to file a police report and get an identity theft report. She explained that clearing up something like this could take months or even years, depending on how cooperative the creditors were. She also said that until my credit was cleared up, there was absolutely no way any lender would approve me for a mortgage. Not with a 400 credit score. Not with $63,000 in debt. I was basically uninsuable. I left that office in a complete daze. I sat in my car in the parking lot for probably 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was going to throw up. Everything I'd worked for, all those years of saving and sacrifice, and I couldn't buy a house because someone had stolen my identity. I pulled up my credit reports on my phone right there in the parking lot. I went through them line by line, and that's when the pattern became clear. The first account had been opened when I was 6 years old. A utility bill for electric service in my name at an address I recognized immediately, 2847 Maple Street, apartment 3B. My mom's first apartment after she and my dad divorced. My hands started shaking harder. I scrolled through more accounts. Cable bill opened when I was 8 at another of my mom's old addresses. Cell phone account when I was 11. Same thing. Credit cards started appearing when I was 13, 15, 16. All of them connected to addresses where my mom had lived over the years. My mother had been using my social security number for 18 years. I sat there in that parking lot and went through every stage of grief in about 10 minutes. Denial, this couldn't be real. There had to be another explanation. Anger, how could she do this to me, her own daughter? Bargaining, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she didn't realize what she was doing. Depression, my life was ruined. I'd never be able to buy a house or get a loan. And finally, a weird kind of acceptance. This was real. This had happened. And I needed to deal with it. I called her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. She answered on the third ring, cheerful like always. She asked how my day was going. Mentioned she was making lasagna for dinner. I interrupted her and asked if we could meet for coffee. That I needed to talk to her about something important. I could hear the shift in her voice. From cheerful to cautious. She asked if everything was okay. I said no, but I didn't want to discuss it over the phone. We agreed to meet the next day at the Starbucks near her current apartment, the one in the strip mall next to the grocery store where she worked as a cashier. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, going over and over the credit reports. I made lists of every account, every address, every date. I tried to find any explanation other than the obvious one. Maybe someone else had stolen both our identities. Maybe there was identity theft ring targeting people with our last name. But I knew. Deep down, I knew it was her. The pattern was too clear. Every time my mom moved to a new apartment, new utility accounts appeared in my name. Every time she needed money, a new credit card appeared. The dates matched up perfectly with periods I remembered from my childhood when she'd been laid off from a job, when her car broke down and she needed to buy another one, when she'd gotten into that car accident and had medical bills. I remembered being 12 and my mom telling me I couldn't do after-school activities because we couldn't afford them. I remembered being 16 and wearing the same pair of shoes for 2 years because she said money was tight. And the whole time, she was opening credit cards in my name and maxing them out. The next day, I got to the Starbucks early and sat at a corner table, away from other people. I'd printed out all the credit reports, highlighted every fraudulent account in yellow. The stack of papers was probably 40 pages thick. My mom arrived about 10 minutes later. She was wearing her grocery store uniform. Must have come straight from work. She smiled when she saw me and ordered her usual caramel macchiato before sitting down. She asked again if everything was okay. I slid the stack of papers across the table without saying anything. She looked confused and picked up the first page. I watched her face as she read through the credit report. The confusion slowly morphed into recognition, then something that looked like panic. Her hand started to shake slightly. She put the paper down and tried to hand it back to me. "There must be some mistake," she said. I asked her directly, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "Did you open these accounts in my name?" She was quiet for a long time. Around us, the Starbucks was busy with the afternoon rush. People ordering drinks, the espresso machine hissing, someone's laptop beeping, normal life continuing while mine fell apart. Then she started crying. Not loud, dramatic crying. Quiet tears that slid down her cheeks while she stared at the table. She said she'd had no choice. After the divorce, my dad stopped paying child support. She was working 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough to cover rent and food and utilities. Her credit was already bad from when she and my dad were together, so she couldn't get utilities or credit cards in her own name. The power company turned off our electricity. The water company did the same. She needed my social security number just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I reminded her that the accounts went back 18 years. There were credit cards opened just last year, when I was 23, when I was an adult with my own place. This wasn't about keeping the lights on when I was a kid. She was still doing it. She got defensive then, her tears drying up quickly. She said she'd always intended to pay everything off eventually. She said I didn't understand how hard it was to be a single mother, working minimum wage jobs, trying to provide for a child when the father walked away. She said she'd sacrificed everything for me, worked herself to the bone, and this was how I repaid her? By accusing her of being a criminal. The word criminal hung in the air between us. I told her I wasn't accusing her of anything. I was stating a fact. She'd committed identity theft. She'd opened 17 accounts in my name without my permission, starting when I was 6 years old and continuing into my adult years. She'd destroyed my credit. And now I couldn't buy a house because of what she'd done. She asked what I expected her to do about it. Her voice had gone cold, defensive. I said she needed to pay off all the accounts and help me dispute them with the credit bureaus. She laughed, this bitter, harsh sound. She said she didn't have $63,000 sitting around. If she had that kind of money, she wouldn't have needed to use my social security number in the first place. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I told her she had to do something. She said there was nothing she could do. She suggested I just wait a few years for the debts to fall off my credit report. She said they'd disappear eventually, that I just needed to be patient. I explained that some of these accounts were still active, that collections agencies were still trying to collect on them, that they wouldn't just disappear, and even if they did, it would take 7 years from the date of last activity. I'd be over 30 before my credit recovered, 30 years old before I could buy a house or get a decent car loan, or maybe even get certain jobs that required a credit check. She shrugged and said that's just how life was sometimes, that I needed to stop being so dramatic about this, that she'd done what she had to do to survive, and I should be grateful she'd kept a roof over my head instead of us ending up homeless. I asked her about Dad's child support. She'd always told me he never paid, that he abandoned us. She went quiet again, and I knew I'd hit something. I told her I was going to call Dad and ask him about it. She said I should do whatever I wanted. She was done with this conversation. We went back and forth for another hour. She cried. I cried. She made excuses. I pointed out the flaws in those excuses. She blamed me for being ungrateful. I reminded her that she'd stolen my identity for 18 years. Round and round we went, getting nowhere. Finally, I stood up to leave. I told her she had 1 week to figure out a payment plan for the debt, or I was going to take legal action. She said I wouldn't do that. I was her daughter. Family doesn't turn on family. I walked out of that Starbucks knowing everything had changed between us forever. That night, I called my dad. We hadn't talked in probably 2 years. The relationship had been strained since the divorce, and I'd mostly taken Mom's side because she was the one who raised me. He sounded surprised to hear from me but happy. I asked him about the child support. He went quiet for a moment, then asked what my mother had told me. I said she'd always said he never paid, that he'd abandoned us financially. He got angry then, but not at me. At her. He told me he'd paid child support every single month until I turned 18. He had bank records to prove it. He sent me photos of the records that night every month, like clockwork. money transferred from his account to hers. He also told me he'd tried to have more of a relationship with me. But Mom had made it difficult. She'd moved without telling him, changed phone numbers, told me he was too busy to call when he did reach out. I'd believed her. About everything. Because she was my mom. And you trust your mom. I spent the next week calling the creditors. One by one, trying to explain the situation. Most of them were unhelpful. They said I'd need to file a police report first, then send them documentation proving the accounts were fraudulent. A few flat out told me that identity theft by a family member was very difficult to prove, and they'd likely side with the person who'd been using the account for years. I talked to friends about what I should do. Most of them were horrified and told me to report her immediately. But one friend, Jessica, whose mother had done something similar, warned me that my mom would never change, that she'd keep using my information until I stopped her legally. Jessica had tried to resolve things privately with her own mother, and the fraud had continued. It was only after Jessica filed a police report that it finally stopped. I consulted with a credit attorney who specialized in identity theft cases. His name was Marcus Ross, and his office was in a small building downtown. The consultation cost $200, money I really couldn't afford, but I needed expert advice. Marcus explained the process in detail. I'd need to file a police report for identity theft. That report would give me an identity theft report, which I could then send to each creditor along with dispute letters. The creditors would investigate, and if they determined the accounts were fraudulent, they'd remove them from my credit report and close the accounts. But there was a significant catch. Once the creditors determined the accounts were fraudulent, they'd likely pursue criminal charges against whoever opened the accounts, which meant my mother could be arrested and charged with multiple counts of identity theft. In our state, identity theft was a felony. She could face up to 10 years in prison per count. Marcus asked me point blank if I was prepared for that possibility. If I was ready to potentially send my own mother to prison. I told him I didn't know. He said I needed to think about it very carefully because once I filed that police report, I couldn't take it back. The wheels would be in motion, and I wouldn't be able to stop them. I thought about it for 3 more days. 3 days of barely sleeping, barely eating, going through the motions at work while my mind spun in circles. I thought about my childhood, about how hard my mom had worked. I remembered her coming home exhausted from double shifts, still making me dinner, and helping me with homework. I remembered her sitting with me in the hospital when I had my appendix out, holding my hand and telling me everything would be okay. But I also thought about the $63,000 in debt she'd left in my name, about the house I couldn't buy, about every future loan or job application that would be affected by my destroyed credit, about the fact that some of these accounts were opened when I was 23, when I was a fully independent adult. If it had just been utilities when I was a kid, maybe I could understand. Maybe. But she'd kept doing it, kept stealing from me, long after she had any excuse. And most importantly, I thought about the fact that when I confronted her, she'd shown no real remorse. She justified it, blamed me for being ungrateful, and refused to help fix it. She'd had a chance to make this right, and she'd chosen not to. On the 8th day after that Starbucks meeting, I made an appointment at the police station. The police station was in a newer building on the east side of town, all glass and brick with an American flag out front. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 15 minutes before I could make myself go inside. This felt so final, so irreversible. But what choice did I have? The officer who took my report was a woman about my mom's age, maybe mid-50s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag said Officer L. Daniels. She was kind but professional, the way I imagine nurses are with terminal patients, compassionate but not overly emotional. She led me to a small interview room with a table and 3 chairs. She asked me to explain the situation from the beginning, and I did. I showed her all the documentation. I'd brought the credit reports with fraudulent accounts highlighted, copies of the addresses proving my mom had lived at those locations, bank statements showing I'd never made payments on any of these accounts. Officer Daniels took notes as I talked, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she looked at me with something like sadness. "You understand this is serious," she said. "Your mother could face criminal charges, multiple felonies. She could go to prison." I nodded, my throat tight. "I understand," but I tried to resolve this with her directly. She refused to help fix it. and some of these accounts are still active. She's still doing it. Officer Daniels asked if I was absolutely sure I wanted to file this report. She explained that identity theft cases against family members were complicated and emotionally devastating. That even if my mother didn't go to prison, our relationship would likely never recover. That my extended family might take her side. That this would change everything. I told her I understood all of that. I also told her that without filing this report, I had no way to clear my name. No way to dispute the fraudulent accounts. No way to rebuild my credit and have a normal financial life. She nodded slowly and started filling out the official report. The process took over 2 hours. I had to go through every single account, providing details about when it was opened, where, for how much. I had to sign statement after statement swearing under penalty of perjury that I hadn't opened these accounts and didn't authorize anyone else to open them. I had to explain my relationship with my mother, how she would have had access to my social security number, why I believed she was responsible. By the time Officer Daniels printed out my copy of the police report and the identity theft report, I felt completely drained. Numb. Like I'd just done something irrevocable and was still processing what it meant. She walked me to the door and told me the detective division would be in touch. They'd investigate, possibly interview my mother. I should expect the process to take several months. She also suggested I consider counseling. That what I was going through was traumatic, and I shouldn't try to handle it alone. I sat in my car in that parking lot again, staring at the official police report in my hands. This was real now. There was no taking it back. I called my mom that evening. My hands were shaking as I dialed. She answered on the second ring, sounding wary. We hadn't spoken since the Starbucks meeting. I told her I'd filed a police report for identity theft. There was silence on the other end. Then she asked what I was talking about. I explained that I'd gone to the police, filed a report about the fraudulent accounts, and named her as the person responsible. That detectives would probably contact her soon. That she might want to get a lawyer. The silence stretched out so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she started screaming, yelling things I'd never heard her say before, using language she'd always told me was unacceptable. She said I'd ruined her life, that I was a terrible daughter, that after everything she'd done for me, I'd betrayed her like this, that she'd never forgive me, that I was dead to her. I tried to explain that I'd given her a chance to make this right and she'd refused, that I had no other option if I wanted to clear my credit. But she wasn't listening. She just kept screaming until I finally hung up. I sat on my apartment floor and cried for an hour. I just reported my own mother to the police. The woman who raised me, who worked multiple jobs to support me, who'd been at every school event and birthday party. And now she was screaming that I was dead to her. But I'd also just taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, toward clearing my name and fixing my credit, toward having a future that wasn't destroyed by someone else's choices. Over the next few weeks, I sent certified letters to every single creditor listed on my credit reports. Each letter included a copy of the police report, a copy of the identity theft report, and a detailed explanation of what had happened. I requested that they investigate the accounts and remove them from my credit history if they determined they were fraudulent. The responses varied wildly. Some creditors, especially the utility companies, removed the accounts almost immediately. They sent me letters confirming the accounts were closed and would be deleted from my credit report within 30 days. Those letters felt like small victories. Other creditors were more difficult. Several credit card companies initially denied my disputes, saying the accounts had been used regularly for years and showed a pattern of consistent activity. I had to send follow-up letters explaining that regular use didn't equal my permission, that I'd been a minor when some accounts were opened, that I had police documentation proving fraud. One creditor, a payday loan company, insisted they'd verified the identity of the person who opened the account and wouldn't remove it without a court order. I had Marcus the attorney send them a letter threatening legal action, and they finally agreed to remove it. 2 months after filing the police report, I got a call from a detective. His name was Detective Brandon Pierce, and he was investigating my case. He needed to ask me some questions and schedule a formal interview. We met at the police station a week later. Detective Pierce was maybe 40, with a receding hairline and tired eyes. He explained that he'd reviewed the police report and the evidence I'd provided. He'd also run my mother's information and found that she had previous financial issues, bankruptcies, evictions, multiple utility accounts closed for non-payment. He said based on the evidence, He believed there was sufficient cause to move forward with charges. But first, he needed to interview my mother. He wanted to see if she'd admit to opening the accounts or if she'd deny it. The interview happened a few days later. I wasn't present, but Detective Pierce told me afterward that my mother had admitted to opening most of the accounts. She'd tried to justify it, saying she'd been desperate, that she'd had no choice, that she'd always planned to pay them off. She'd claimed it was a misunderstanding, that she thought she had my permission. Detective Pierce said that defense wouldn't hold up. I'd been a minor when many accounts were opened, so I couldn't have given permission. And for the accounts opened when I was an adult, I had documentation proving I'd never authorized them. He submitted his report to the district attorney's office with a recommendation to file charges. I waited for weeks to hear what would happen. Finally, 3 months after I first filed that police report, I got a call from the DA's office. They were moving forward with charges against my mother. Multiple counts of identity theft and fraud. She faced up to 10 years in prison if convicted on all counts. My mom hired a lawyer, some public defender who looked overwhelmed and underpaid. Her lawyer reached out to the DA's office asking if I'd be willing to drop the charges in exchange for my mother entering a payment plan to resolve the debts. The DA called me to discuss it. She explained that I couldn't actually drop the charges even if I wanted to. Once the state picked up the case, it was out of my hands. But my cooperation as a witness was important, and if I was adamant about not testifying, they'd have a harder time securing a conviction. I told her I'd cooperate fully. My mother had stolen my identity for 18 years. She needed to face consequences. The case dragged on for what felt like forever. I had to testify before a grand jury, standing in front of a room full of strangers and repeating the entire story. I had to explain my relationship with my mother, her financial history, how she'd had access to my social security number. Some of the grand jurors looked sympathetic. Others looked skeptical, like they couldn't believe a mother would do this to her own child. The grand jury indicted her on 6 counts of identity theft. The trial date was set for 6 months later, but my mother's lawyer negotiated a plea deal before we got that far. She pled guilty to 3 counts of identity theft in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge sentenced her to 5 years of probation, 600 hours of community service, and restitution of the full $63,000. The restitution payment plan stretched out over 10 years, which meant she'd be paying me back until I was 34 years old. But at least it was something. The judge also ordered her to attend mandatory financial counseling and barred her from opening any new lines of credit without court approval for the duration of her probation. I sat in the courtroom during the sentencing and watched my mother stand before the judge. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she gave a short statement about how sorry she was, how she'd made terrible mistakes, how she hoped one day I could forgive her. But she never looked at me, not once during the entire hearing. The criminal conviction had consequences beyond the legal ones. My mother lost her job at the grocery store. Turns out, having a felony conviction for fraud and identity theft makes you unemployable in positions that handle money. She ended up working retail, some minimum wage job at a discount clothing store, making barely enough to survive and make her restitution payments. My extended family mostly took her side. My aunt, my mother's sister, called me heartless. She said family doesn't turn on family, that I should have found another way. My grandmother, my mom's mother, said I was ungrateful and cruel. They didn't seem to understand or care that I'd been the victim, that my mother had stolen my identity for 18 years and shown no remorse until she was facing criminal charges. A few cousins stayed neutral, but most sided with my mom. I ended up cutting ties with most of them. It hurt, losing that family connection, but I couldn't be around people who thought what she'd done was acceptable. But slowly, painfully, my credit started to improve. As accounts were removed from my credit report, my score began to climb. From 400 to 450, then to 500, 550, 600. Each increase felt like a small victory. Proof that I was doing the right thing, that I was reclaiming my financial identity. A year after filing the police report, my credit score had climbed to 650. Still not great, but improving steadily. Most of the fraudulent accounts had been removed, though a few were still in dispute with creditors who were being difficult. I contacted Sandra, my original loan officer, to see if there was any possibility of getting approved for a mortgage now. She reviewed my current credit report and said that with a 650 score and documentation proving the remaining disputed accounts were fraudulent, she might be able to get me approved through an FHA loan. It took another 6 months of working with Sandra, providing documentation, and waiting for the last few disputed accounts to be resolved. But finally, 18 months after that initial rejected application, I got approved for a mortgage. Not for the original house I'd wanted. That had sold long ago to someone whose mother hadn't stolen their identity. But for a different house, a smaller 2-bedroom place in a neighborhood a bit farther from work. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The closing was on a rainy Tuesday in October. I sat at a long conference table in a title company office and signed my name over and over, probably 100 times. Each signature felt significant, like I was reclaiming my identity, one pen stroke at a time. When the title company handed me the keys to my first house, I sat in my car and cried. I'd done it. Despite everything my mother had done to sabotage me, despite the destroyed credit, and the legal battles, and the family drama, I'd bought a house. I didn't invite my mom to the closing. We hadn't spoken since the sentencing. She'd tried to call a few times, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and ended angry. I never called her back. I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready. My credit continued to improve. 2 years after filing the police report, my score broke 700. All the fraudulent accounts were finally removed. I had a mortgage in good standing, a credit card that I used responsibly and paid off in full every month, and a car loan for a reliable vehicle. I was building the credit history I should have been building all along, the one my mother had stolen from me. 3 years after the sentencing, I'm 27 now. My credit score is 725. I'm financially stable, with savings and investments and a retirement account. I've rebuilt my life in spite of what she did. My mother finished her probation last year. She's still making restitution payments, about $500 a month, and will be for another 7 years. We've had a few awkward interactions at family events when I couldn't avoid her. Mostly stilted conversations about the weather and work. The relationship will never be what it was. Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken. People still ask me sometimes if I regret filing that police report, if it was worth destroying my relationship with my mother over money. And I have to correct them every time. It wasn't about money. It was about my identity, my future, my right to control my own financial life. My mother stole more than $63,000 from me. She stole 18 years of building good credit. She stole my ability to buy a house when I was ready. She stole opportunities I'll never get back. And when I confronted her, when I gave her a chance to make it right, she refused. Filing that police report was the hardest thing I've ever done. Sitting in that interview room, signing those statements, knowing I was setting in motion something that could send my own mother to prison, it was agonizing. But it was also the only way to reclaim my life. The only way to stop the cycle of theft and deception. The only way to ensure she couldn't keep using my identity for her own benefit. I've learned a lot in the last 3 years. I've learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. I've learned that love and family don't mean accepting abuse or theft. I've learned that standing up for yourself sometimes means making choices that other people won't understand or support. Most importantly, I've learned that you can rebuild from almost anything. A 400 credit score felt like the end of the world when I was sitting in that loan officer's office. But with time and effort and legal intervention, I turned it around. I'm now living the life I deserve, the life my mother tried to steal from me. Every time I pull into my driveway and see my house, I remember what it cost to get here. The police report, the grand jury testimony, the courtroom hearing, the lost family relationships. But I also remember that I fought for this. I stood up for myself when nobody else would. I chose my future over a toxic relationship. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because everyone deserves a chance at a normal life, at financial stability, at the ability to buy a house without discovering their own mother has destroyed their credit since childhood. That's my story. A 24-year-old trying to buy a first house, discovering a 400 credit score, and learning that the person responsible was the one who raised me. It's the story of how I had to file a police report against my own mother just to have a future. Was it worth it? Yes. Every difficult moment, every tear, every family member who stopped speaking to me, it was worth it to reclaim my identity and my life. Because I deserved better than a 400 credit score at 24. And I fought like hell to get it.